Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloney, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA. And each week, I look to bring you different people who have encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and allow them to come on and tell pieces of their story in hopes that it helps you be brave enough and tell some of yours. This week, I am so excited to have Aeriale Johnson on with me today. Aeriale, do you kind of want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are?
Sure. My name is Aeriale Johnson. I am a second grade teacher at Washington Elementary School in San Jose, California. I also work for the San Jose Area Writing Project on the side as a teacher consultant. I'm doing some professional development and working with students during the summer. We offer some camps, so it's really fantastic.
Awesome. So, Aeriale, have you always wanted to be a teacher?
Actually, I didn't always want to be a teacher. Um, I am from a family of teachers, grandparents, mother, and I thought I wanted to be the polar opposite of them. So I started college as a pharmacy major, actually. Then I was a journalism major for a little while after that, and then I finally settled upon education. It took me a little bit to settle myself into kind of what I believe is my calling. So I guess I tried to run away.
So, how long have you been in education?
This is my 22nd year in the classroom. So I
Wow.
started teaching in 1998. So yeah, it's been a while. I always tell people I just crossed the line where I've been teaching for more than half my life. So
So, what would you say is probably one of the biggest lessons you've learned about yourself since becoming a teacher?
oh wow, that's a question. Um, I Wow. I feel like I could give a lot of
I'm
answers
sure.
to
I'm
that
sure.
question. Um, but I think over the past few years, I think, if you're an educator who's doing your job, you're continuously learning. So
Mhm.
maybe I'll just talk about the past few years.
Yeah.
So from 2016 to 2018, I served as a Heinemann Fellow.
Mhm.
And during that experience, I got to meet Tricia Barvia, Dr. Kim Parker, Tiana Silvis, and Anna Osborne. And all the other fellows, obviously, they are fantastic and amazing, but we were the fellows of color in that cohort. And I did a lot of work personally as an individual. I was raised in the South.
Mhm.
So I've had some experiences. So I've done a lot of work personally
Mhm.
in terms of race and decolonizing my mind and working on all of those sorts of things, and including like walking through the door of no return and all of those things. So I'd done a lot of work and I thought I was good. And I made very intentional choices to
Mhm.
teach children of color. Um, it's a passion of mine and it was very important to me. But for some reason, until that time, I hadn't put the two things together.
Uh-huh.
So I knew that I was a teacher of children of color, and that was a very deliberate choice. And I knew that I was a person of color, obviously. Um, but I never really identified as a teacher of color and
Right.
what that meant for my practice. And when I encountered these brilliant individuals, was kind of the first time I really saw myself as a teacher of color
Mhm.
and started to realize all of what that meant. And I went to the first step was I went to New York City to Tiana's school and I spent some time in her classroom. And I wrote about this for Heinemann, but I said it was like my magical moment where I realized, oh my gosh, I'm a swan. I'm a beautiful black swan. All of this time, I thought like I was the ugly duckling teacher.
Uh-huh.
I've been called the hippie teacher and the weirdo teacher, and for the longest time, I had linked that to being progressive in
Mhm.
education because I hadn't necessarily been in progressive spaces in terms of where I was teaching, but I had been a progressive educator myself,
Right.
very much informed by the progressives in our profession. And that wasn't it. And once I saw Tiana teaching, and I realized, oh my gosh, and Tiana's Mexican, she's not black. But once I saw her teaching, I saw myself and I
Mhm.
realized that all of the things, all of the choices that I make, all of the ways in which I interact with children, my passion, um, the way that I teach in ways that are culturally relevant, um, all of those things were coming from the fact that I myself am a person of color.
Right.
And so everything changed for me after that. And because when you then you start to do it with more deliberation,
Mhm.
right? And you start to really think deeply about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how it's impacting children and how you might do things differently. You know, we're constantly changing as educators. So I would say that that's been my biggest wake up call and kind of change over the past several years. So I really learned a lot
So
about myself
I find
through
that
that
so
experience.
interesting what you talked about just then about how you knew you were you wanted to work with children of color. You knew you identified as a person of color, but you didn't see yourself as a teacher of color. Kind of talk to me a little bit about what the differences are there and how how you kind of came to the understanding that you weren't seeing yourself.
Well, I think part of it was that I hadn't worked in a space where I was with other teachers of color.
Ah, yeah.
I think that that's the first part of it. I think if
Right.
I had been working in places where I was not the only teacher of color for the
Mhm.
most part, um, then I would have recognized it right away because I would have
Right.
seen it all around me, right? And seen the similarities and of the spaces from which we were teaching,
Mhm.
you know. Um, but I didn't see it. And I think
Mhm.
I had to see it in order to name it, right? I think that happens to people a lot. Like they don't realize something about themselves until they see it in another person. So I think that was a huge part of it. And I think, you know, that's why meeting those brilliant women of
Mhm.
color who are also teachers gave me that kind of wake up call and made me come to that realization. I think that in terms of how I've changed since I came to that realization, I would say first and foremost, um, I'm a more vocal advocate.
Mhm.
I was always an advocate, but I'm vocal now, and I'm more willing to name white supremacy when I
Mhm.
see it and racism, and to call those things out. Um, and not be afraid to do that, not be fearful. It's made me more cognizant of things like my classroom library. I
Mhm.
think you know I was doing my best to represent the
Mhm.
children in my class prior to this, obviously, but now it's like a non-negotiable.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I think that I'm more willing to step outside of the bounds of what the expectations of me are in any given space where I'm teaching or working with the writing project or something like that. Like it's at the forefront of my mind all of the time. So thinking about, you know, like at the writing project, what kinds of children are we serving?
Mhm.
And if we're not serving a particular demographic, why not?
Right.
You know? So at the writing project, we have so many children of color come to us, but most of them are Indian and Asian immigrants. And so I'm like, well, why aren't we serving Black children? Why aren't we serving Mexican children? There are plenty of
Mhm.
those people here in the area that we are not serving. And so we had to come to this realization that we were serving people who had the money, right, to
Right.
pay for the camps that we have and those sorts of things. And so we last year we haven't really started our during the school year project work yet. It'll start in a couple of weeks, but last school year we were able to give students from my school, my Title I school, that is primarily students who are Latinx, mostly Mexican, we gave scholarships. And so we had about 25 kids come to our
Wow.
program throughout the school year last year who would not have been there otherwise. And we just let them come for free. And it was because I was vocal
Uh-huh.
about that.
Yeah.
I think before I would have noticed it, but maybe not said anything. I'm just a lot less safe now.
Well,
It doesn't matter.
and that's what I want to mention. That was one of the reasons I wanted to have you as a guest. Is I think you do such a great job of fighting for the rights of all of your kids and all of the kids we serve. Period, not just even your own students. And I feel like you really know your voice and you really own your voice. But my question for you is, you share so many great thought-provoking things online, and you're not afraid to stand up to people when they are doing something that is clearly not what's in the best interest of kids, even though they may be hiding under that facade. And it's like, no, that's not what you're really doing. But what I would ask you is, obviously, when you stand up against injustice and stand up for the rights of kids, you're going to get a lot of pushback. And I'm sure you probably feel a lot of venom thrown at you when you stand up like that. How do you not let that stop you from raising your voice? How do you not let it eat away at who you are?
Well, first of all, I would say that I have the great fortune at being at a school where most of the teachers are of color.
Mhm.
Both of our administrators are of color, and
Wow.
so I'm very safe
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
in terms of standing up for my students. I feel like I could cry because I'm so grateful to
Mhm.
be in this space because this is not the kind of space I was in before.
Right.
And when I reflect on my career and the experiences I had before, I taught in Alaska for 11 years. And all 11 of those years, I was in the bush serving Native Alaskan kids, both
Mhm.
Inupiaq and Yupik children. And basically, the reason that I left that space is because I'd had enough of um, white supremacy,
Right.
right?
Right.
And we had the great opportunity in one of my school districts. We had an absolutely brilliant woman, Jana Hacharek, who was running our Inupiaq education department.
Mhm.
And she'd gone to great lengths to study what it was that parents and families, grandparents, the entire community. We had several communities across North Alaska, Northern Alaska, and she had gone to every single community and figured out doing interviews and community meetings and those sorts of things and figured out exactly what those families wanted for their kids. What do you want your 18-year-old child who's graduated from high school to know and be able to do? So she did all of that work, and then we started a curriculum project um, where the curriculum that we were teaching our kids, we're still going to teach the standards, but it was going to be rooted in what these families wanted for their children,
Wow.
which, you know, you talk about colonization and white supremacy and all of this. You talk about native villages in Alaska. I
Mhm.
mean, it is just rife with it, right? It's just full of
Right.
it. And I think that was part of my process too. I
Mhm.
think that's when I really started to deal with my personal experiences as a person of color. Had a lot of interesting experiences there because they're so accustomed to having white teachers come into the villages and live, and I was the
Mm.
black teacher, so it was like,
Yeah.
well, you're not like me, but you're not white. Like, what are you, Miss Ariel? And they call me Miss Ariel there. And so, anyway, Jana, beautiful project, amazing, wonderful. She did great work. And it was just slowly whittled away by white
Mhm.
supremacy to the point that she just had to make the choice to retire
Yeah.
to escape, everything that she was enduring. She was standing up, right, against white supremacy. She was trying to make a school district that is primarily composed of Inupiaq children, centered around who they are, their
Right.
identity, and I'll be the first person to tell you that I struggled. Like, I knew that it was the right thing to do and I wanted to do it, but I kind of struggled with, like, how can I do this, right? Like, how
Mhm.
can I teach from an Inupiaq perspective when I'm a Black person? And
Right.
I never forget the day we were at a PD and I got really angry and I said, my mother did not send me to school to learn how to be Black. She taught me that at home. And now when I reflect on that, it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so much shame. Like, how incredibly colonized was my mind that
Right.
I would think like that school isn't a place where you should see yourself reflected and you shouldn't be rendered invisible. And like that was a product of my personal experiences in school, right? That I would think that, well, that was my parents' job, right?
Right.
To teach me about my identity as a Black person. That was the church's job, that I went to. That I have
Mhm.
educated parents, and my grandmother got a master's degree in the early 50s, like just like I'm really fortunate that
Yeah.
I come from a super educated family and that valued teaching me, about the Black intellect and
Mhm.
Black intellectuals, and learning about all of those things. So I definitely, had that upbringing. But how sad that I didn't ever think, oh, I should have had that at school, right? Like that should have
Mhm.
been this, part of my schooling. But
And that's such
I
a
experienced it all, I had a Eurocentric curriculum, and I didn't have a teacher of color
yeah.
until I was doing some graduate work.
And it's so funny that you mentioned some of these things because those of us who are white, we so take for granted all of that has been put in place that is beneficial to us. And counts out other kids and other things like that because like even you, I mean, I've interviewed a variety of diverse guests and almost all of them say what you just said, that it was many years into their educational career before they had somebody that was an educator that looked like they did. And to me that's just it's shocking because that's not the life I grew up in, but I love that you keep calling it out for what it is, which is white fragility. And I think exactly like what you expressed earlier, for those of us in this country who are white, when we begin to educate ourselves over our own fragility and our own biases, we begin to see a whole other side of the way things have been too. And that's why I think it's important for us to educate all of that. Like it's not just the people of color's responsibility to educate other people about being a person of color. It's like, no, we can go educate ourselves too. And I love that you are out there on the forefront being that champion, standing up for the kids. And I think it's incredibly admirable. I love your work and it pushes me to think and constantly evaluate, okay, what did I just say there? Okay, what did I do? Why did I do that? Where did that come from? And I think that's how we need to be as educators, is we need to look at those sides of things. When you look at, your own childhood and your own upbringing, what is something that happened that you feel really played a part into the woman you are today?
Oh, wow. That's another question.
And
I guess,
I know, like earlier, I know there's probably lots of answers for this one, but if you just had to pick one.
right, right. But when I get this kind of question, I always feel compelled to honor my late grandmother. Her
Mhm.
name was Bobby McKinney, and she was a teacher for almost 40 years in the state of Florida. And when I asked her, I was an adult who was teaching by this time. I asked her why she became a teacher, and she said,
Mhm.
well, my options were to teach or to clean up after white people. And she said, I'm not cleaning up after anybody but myself. But that was actually true. That was her reality. And so my grandfather passed away before I was even born, but he was an administrator. He was, a principal, and my grandmother was a teacher for a very long time. She was in the same community the entire time. And
Wow.
one of the stories that I always tell is like, I told you I tried to avoid being a teacher. I'm going to do something else. And she even tried to push me, even as an adult, when I would talk to her, she'd ask me questions like, so when are you going to go to law school? Um, because I think that, she feels like, well, you have so many more options, right? So many
Mhm.
more opportunities that I didn't have. And I wish that you would seize them because they're
Yeah.
more lucrative. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. So, anyway, at her funeral,
Mhm.
she was 92 years old when she passed away. So she had students who had retired themselves as teachers at this
Wow.
point. Yeah. So some of her former students, who some of them were retired teachers, spoke at her funeral. And one of the ladies said, Um, Mrs. McKinney was a holistic teacher before holistic was a buzzword. And I just kind of wept in that moment. Like,
Yeah.
this is the thing that I tried to avoid being. This is never a conversation that my grandmother and I had in terms of like being a holistic teacher and that sort of thing. But like everything that I am as a teacher, I believe is rooted in my upbringing. I spent summers with her, all of those things. She was a hardworking woman
Yeah.
who took really good care of all of us and her grandchildren in particular. And she ensured that every single one of us had the opportunity to go to college, like in financial means. And
Wow.
like I said, she was a teacher. So um, she just cared deeply about people and making sure that everybody, including people who are not in her family, had what they needed. And so, anyway, when I reflect on myself as a teacher, like there was never any deliberate like I want to be just like my grandmother because I didn't even want to be a teacher. I thought think like oh turned out like her. Not exactly. There are definitely some differences there in terms of
Right, right.
personality, but in terms of my teaching, in a lot of ways, I turned out like her, and I hope that I have, former students at my funeral saying the same things about me that they said about her.
I love
So,
that. And I love that you're honoring her memory by continuing to tell her story. I think that's such a powerful thing because it reminds us, like, even when you're talking, my grandmother was an educator too for many years. And I got to go speak at the district that she taught in a couple weeks ago. And I got to meet a couple teachers there who had her. And I never got to see my grandmother teach. I never got to meet any of her students. But that moment to meet those women who she impacted was such a cool because my grandmother was the same for me like you would describe yours and hearing you just made me emotional too. I was like, oh, I'm remembering all these things about my grandmother and all that she fought for too. So thank you for telling that story.
yeah,
Well, Ariel, one question I always love to end these conversations on is if there was one thing that you wish more people knew or understood, what would your one thing be?
about education.
Anything. Anything.
Oh, wow. You know what I wish? I wish that more people understood how powerful children are,
Mhm.
how brilliant they are, how capable they are. I wish they knew, like Vygotsky said, that children grow into the intellectual life that is around them,
Mhm.
and we don't have to dumb ourselves down or talk down to children. We lift them up. Today, the poetry collection, Can I Touch Your Hair? Have you heard of that one?
Yes, yes.
So I'm reading that with my second graders.
Uh-huh.
We're reading that, and we the poems are in pairs, and so we read a pair today. And again, I teach second grade, so this is a 7-year-old right now.
Mhm.
We're at that 7-year-old point of the school year, and a little girl said, "Miss J, this is important." She said, "We have to talk about our differences." And I said, "I wonder why you think that." And I kind of let the kids pair together and talk about it. And then they came back together and they said, "Well, if we don't talk about our differences, then we also won't be able to talk about the ways in which we are the same. And if we don't see all of each other, then um, then we won't know why each one of us is special and
Oh,
why each one of us is important. We won't see, the whole of our being." And when you talk about the pushback, the I tweeted out a mixing of paint to make our skin color thing that we did. We're about to do it this year too, but that we did last year. Just like, oh, hey guys, this is what we did today. Tweeted it out, and it became the thing. Like Carla Shalaby retweeted it. I think it was liked over 80,000 times. Like one morning, I came into work and I opened my email, and one of the instructional assistants at my school had sent me an email. He's like, "You're on the front page of Yahoo and the front
oh.
page of Reddit," and like it became this huge thing. It just blew up, right? And so, It was about this time last year, and so it's like popping back up, like in
Mhm.
people's feeds and whatever. And so it's been retweeted, and I think We Are Teachers posted it the other day. And I was just kind of reading through some of the comments, and one woman said, "Well, who's teaching them about their differences? Like, you shouldn't do that. Like, it shouldn't be
Mhm.
important that we recognize." And then someone else replied, "This is my favorite reply, their eyes." So, like, duh, like, we don't see this. Hello.
Exactly.
It's like if you don't see all of a person,
Mhm.
and if you don't see those things, their skin color, their race, their all the parts of their identity, if you don't recognize that and you don't make that a part of your daily instruction, a part of your class, a part of things that you talk about, then you render people invisible
Right.
by not making them visible.
Right.
There's no in between. You either are making children visible or you're making children invisible.
Mhm.
And this little girl who said that to me, beautiful child. I About half of the kids that I have this year, I taught them when they were in kindergarten. So
Aw.
this is a super fun, like kind of strange
Yeah.
version of looping. We skipped a year, but now we're back together. And so that little girl, I told you our school is primarily Latinx, and this
Mhm.
little girl is Vietnamese. And when she was a kid, like, we listened to Vietnamese songs and we read books by Vietnamese people. And, she was very visible in here and she spoke Vietnamese and, and all of
Mhm.
those things. Last year on the playground, she said to me, she was eating grapes. And I said, "Oh, how do you say grapes in Vietnamese?" And she said, "I don't talk like that here anymore."
Wow.
And I was so brokenhearted. I was
Yeah.
like, why would you say that? We had this whole conversation about it. Well, first day of school, literally the first day of school, we're doing a heart map and we're using nouns on that day. Like, what are you that go inside of your heart? And she raised her hand, as modeling in front of the person. She said, "Vietnam, Miss J, you love Vietnam." And I was like, "Yes, I do. I've never been there, but it's on my bucket list. I've
Uh-huh.
seen so many beautiful pictures. My friend went there last year, all of this." She's like, "Put that on there." And all of a sudden, like, you could see it. She's Vietnamese again,
Mhm.
and she speaks
Yeah.
Vietnamese. We were learning about primary, secondary, and tertiary colors, and she's telling us how to say those words in Vietnamese. And it just, like, she just saw me and remembered,
Right.
right? This is who I am, and I can be who that person is in this space. And
Right.
we did a lot of work together. She had a Mexican little girl ask her why she didn't eat human food when we were, yeah, in our
Mhm.
kindergarten class.
Uh-huh.
And of course, that was very painful. The same child
Mhm.
asked me what I was doing here with them. I didn't belong with them because I'm black.
Wow.
So we did a lot of, and so people think, oh, we don't need to talk about this with children. We
Yeah.
don't need to bring it up. The children brought it up,
Exactly.
right? And I had to work
Mhm.
through it. And so, this year we are definitely we're working on all of these things, and it's just so important. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make children visible and to understand how incredibly brilliant they are, how cognizant they are of the world and all the things around them. There's a quote from a child on my wall over there, and I'll just end by reading it to you. Um, so this was a little boy who was in my class last year, and my class last year was mostly boys.
Mhm.
And when we started the school year, about half of them were reading on a kindergarten level, and then many more in second grade, and many more were still, pretty far below grade level. So anyway, we did a lot of reading
Right.
work, so much reading work. And I also, have you read Troublemakers?
Yes.
Oh, it's
Love
my
it.
favorite ever. It's so good. So I had read Troublemakers a few times, and so I made a deliberate choice to, like, explicitly teach about freedom
Mhm.
in my classroom last year. It was a huge, important part of our identity as a class, and I will do that forever now because I realized how important it was. So anyway, those two things put together. So this little boy said, this was in his reading reflection at the end
Mhm.
of the school year. He said, "I feel free when we read. Freedom is a journey through words and the pictures we make in our mind when we read. Freedom is our brilliant ideas. In our class, we are powerful, we are strong."
Wow.
That's who children, that was, an 8-year-old boy.
Yeah.
That's who children are if you give them the space to be. and do those things. So um, I just wish that people knew how deeply children can think. And I owe all of that to my experience with Reggio Emilia,
Mhm.
um, having gone there in the Noble School. That is a Reggio inspired school in Portland, Oregon. I spent a lot of time there. I always love to give them a shout out. It's my favorite school ever.
Well, that
So,
was gorgeous. I have to tell you, I'm so glad you shared that quote. Well, Ariel, I absolutely adore you and your work. And honestly, I feel like I'm just like taking it in. I'm like, you know what? You could just talk to me for like another hour and a half. I'll just keep learning and taking it in. The stuff you share is just brilliant. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on
thank
and have
you
this
so
chat with
much.
me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a great
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts or videos. You can watch past episodes on there. I hope this conversation tonight has inspired you to get out there and tell some of your story because every story matters.